Good evening, friends and friends yet to be made. Tonight we are talking with acclaimed Tony and Drama Desk Award-winning producer Joey Monda. With collaborators Lorenzo Tione and Jay Quo, Joey heads Sing Out Louise Productions, an entertainment production company that boasts an impressive list of credits, including George Takei's semi-autobiographical musical Allegiance, The Inheritance, Slave Play, and Hadestown. Joey also heads Daily Monda Management with collaborator Frank Daly. The company specializes in developing and managing new works, in particular, new musicals. Monda is a Youngstown, Ohio native and an esteemed graduate of Wright State University's musical theater program. Joey, thank you so much for joining us today. Let's start off with, how you doing today?
Today I am doing well. I think, like everybody, COVID is a take it day by day, hour by hour thing, but today seems optimistic. It seems like people are getting vaccinated and that there is light at the end of the tunnel from all of this. So today I am well and optimistic.
Yes, I love to hear that. Things are finally starting to move with all of that.
Amen.
Amen. And speaking of that, we haven't been able to get to the theater because of all of this. But that is what brought us all here. So let's start out with, when did you know theater was going to be a part of your life?
From a very young age, my parents, who are also in the Zoom room, needed an outlet for my hyperactivity when I was a kid. And so got me involved with a local community theater, which stuck in, when I was 8 years old, and I never left after that. I got involved at the Youngstown Playhouse when I was super young, and it was clearly my home away from home, and all the way up through going on to Wright State for the musical theater performance as my major. I did a lot of work there, and then within the local community theaters, and then branching out into the other Cleveland and Pittsburgh areas. So it's always been an assumption that rather than a decision that theater was going to be a part of my life.
You just always kind of knew since being your 8-year-old self.
Yeah, and I mean, I was fortunate that I grew up around people that, with other people as they were going off to college, they were going off for theater in different degrees, whether it was performance or management or whatever it was. And so, and then my mom also works at Youngstown State University. And so knowing that theater and knowing that you could go to college for it and make a career out of it, was something that I always knew about. And so I was very fortunate that was kind of always the flag that I was driving toward.
Yeah, that's a great one. It's great to have that support and know that those things are out there. And just
yeah, I was very fortunate. A lot of people have moments of reckoning of where they go, oh my gosh, that's a job, and to be involved. And that was something that I was very fortunate that I always knew about. Though albeit I don't think I knew exactly, I did not know exactly what I wanted to be doing or where I would end up fitting in the landscape, but I always knew that it was a possibility to make your living and make your life be in the theater. And so I'm very fortunate that that's always been on the table for me.
Yes, and you have very much embraced that. You're making an incredible impact in the theater world. I'm curious about how you transitioned from being on stage to being in these production and managing roles.
The blame definitely begins with my parents. Both of them, have backgrounds in business. And so I grew up constantly bridging a left and a right brain. My mom is the dean of the College of Business at Youngstown State. So that was certainly obviously always a part of my upbringing in my life. And then because of the amount of time that I spent at local theaters, I was not only doing things that were on stage, I wasn't just auditioning, but when I wasn't in the show, I was stage managing, or I was working crew, or I was working the light board. And so doing all of that introduced me to all of the different elements that make up a show that the audience doesn't get to see, or they see and they don't realize. And so in addition to also working in the theater space, I would also work in the office space. And so I knew that there was a director of education, and I knew that there were all of these different elements of what makes a theater company operate. And so that was kind of, again, that was always within my realm of understanding and knowledge, just by virtue of being exposed to it so frequently when I was growing up. And then when I went off to Wright State, there was a student-run theater. We called it the directing lab, where ultimately every weekend a different student would rent out the lab to put on and produce their own work. And so by my sophomore year at school, I was running and programming that for my sophomore, junior, and senior year. So I was getting the administrative exposure and the, programming a quarterly season there. And also, we were talking about this before the call, but Dayton, Ohio actually has a surprisingly vibrant arts and theater scene. And so there was an equity theater in town called The Human Race. And so I was able to also work there frequently going to school. And the program at Wright State was extraordinarily supportive of all of my different interests. I also played the piano. And so I was able to music direct and accompany through my time at school. And so I just by nature of loving theater and all elements of it that makes it happen, I was exposed to all of these different aspects of it. To bring it full circle and to actually answer your question though, when I moved to New York, admittedly, I did not know what I wanted to do. I had moved here under the assumption of acting and, figuring out how to make life work. But through a previous internship, I had actually set up another internship with a Broadway producer when I graduated school. And I was actually able to leave school a couple of months early to start working in her office. She had a Broadway producing office, but as well as a theatrical management office. And so I would bridge my first few months in New York. I was interning at both of those. And so once my eyes were opened to the actual business of show business, and seeing the collaboration and what that really entailed, I never even looked back on the performance element. It was all how to make theater, but in a totally different way.
Yes, and hearing all of your experiences about the different roles you played throughout your time in theater, it makes sense that you would end up finding yet another way to approach the creativity in this work.
Yeah, and like I said, one of the things that I look back and I really value in those times is the collaborative spirit and, how many people it takes to make this one thing happen that doesn't happen ever again. Every night in the theater is unique. And so when I found out that producing and general management actually had hands-on involvement with every single element of a show, from the creative team, the writers, the director, the choreographer, the music director, to the advertising team, the orchestrator, the copyist who takes the sheet music and writes, transcribes the sheet music for every musician in the pit. The jobs of the producer and the general manager have a relationship with every single person in the theater that makes the show happen. And so I think the reason I continue to be drawn and so passionate about it is because of the collaborative experience, and that really the positions that I gravitate toward are the center of the wheel of what makes everything happen.
I think that's really evident reading the bio on your website and everything, that you have these two companies that you're working with collaborators, even in this role as producer or manager. It's not just collaborating with, as you said, all of these different players in the world of the theater, but also amongst people doing similar work to what you're doing. I'm sure your roles complement each other, but that collaboration.
They do.
So
yeah, they do. And fortunately, like I said, I grew up bridging a left and a right brain element of it as well. And so that's, throughout, as I continue to function and continue to work in the world, so much of my day-to-day job is working with artists as well as securing financing and investors and everything, and being able to translate the business and the show and the art in each direction, being able to talk to an artist and understand what they're going for in their more ethereal and less tangible delivery, and then also being able to translate that directly to who's going to be investing in financing, or how to sell it and how to market a product and how to have that conversation. That's fortunately a vocabulary that I've grown up really building in both elements of that. And so I think I'm uniquely positioned in other ways that not everybody is, that I'm able to have that conversation with all of those different types of people.
Yeah, you're constantly switching hats, tactics. I imagine that the pitch is different depending on who you're talking to. It must be. Right?
Yes, that is correct. I mean, using your acting terminology, no matter what, when we have conversations, we have partners, and there's an objective, and being able to make sure that we're communicating efficiently and most effectively with whoever we're speaking is important, and that's absolutely a huge part of my job. And being able to understand the different ways that people like to work and the different processes that come into play is a huge part of how to make sure that everybody is working together cohesively and effectively, but making sure that I'm being clear with the common goal that we're all driving towards, so that everybody is speaking and at least clear of the final goal, even if we're all going about it in different ways.
Do you feel that the final goal shifts from show to show, or is it always kind of the goal is to make the show as great as it can be?
Well, my initial response is that's kind of the element of why I gravitate toward new work, is because we are figuring it out as we go, and hopefully there's, as the producer, I have the vision, or I've engaged a director that has the vision for a singular goal that we're all going toward, and it's all of our jobs to speak that language and go toward that. And as questions, obstacles come up, we have to make sure that when we address them, that everything we do is in service towards the final product, or in service towards the message, or what the goal that we're trying to achieve is.
That makes sense.
And that goal can be, everything from what the actual new show looks like toward we need to get this particular type of demographic in to see this show. We're not effectively marketing to that audience, or we're not effectively negotiating this contract. What's a new way for us to go about that? But ultimately, it's all in service of doing something, the art, bringing it in at budget, and making sure that the people that need to see it and should see it are in the theater and have the ability and access to see it. That they do.
That last one sounds like it's probably especially challenging sometimes. What kind of methods are you using to make sure that you're finding the right audience? It's hard, and it changes on a show to show basis. One of our jobs as producers is to figure out who is the audience. And I will say, as I talk to other people, when I talk to artists in particular that are either pitching me or talking to me about their show, and I say, who's the audience? And they respond, everybody. It's a full audience. That's never a proper answer. There's always somebody who's the most likely and that's going to be the most interested in seeing something specifically. And so it's, we work with advertising teams, and we work with marketing teams, and we look at data of who that's going to look at, and how do we effectively target them. Whether it's, people who, maybe this show is so unique, like with Slave Play, we knew that the people that were going to be the most responsive to Slave Play probably have never seen a Broadway show before in their life. And so for a multitude of reasons, they've never seen a Broadway show. So how do we get word of our Broadway show out to that audience? And we employed a number of people and a number of tactics to do that. But that's basically what, as soon as a show starts to go, you as a producer, you have to be thinking, who wants to see this? Yeah, I actually am really excited to tell you I had the privilege to see Slave Play the day before it closed, because I was in New York auditioning for Urda's. And that made me think about how there's a number of shows that you've worked on that have to do with a social consciousness. And I'm wondering how you look at that. Do you think that that's a very necessary factor in the work that we're putting out there? Is it something you like to do when you can, or how does that figure into the shows that you take on?
There's kind of two parts to my response. One, because this is ultimately a business. I work in the commercial theater. Broadway is about selling tickets, and we have money that people invest, and we have to return that investment. So there's a balance where not every show on face value is going to have some massive social conscience, but there's always going to be a message that moves people emotionally. So like my office is a co-producer on Mrs. Doubtfire, and while I can sit here and say, Mrs. Doubtfire has this very, very important message of the importance of family and what a man will do for his kids, which it does. The reality is people are going to go to that show because they're looking for a fun night of theater. And so that's, there's an element of that. But in order for me to do the slave plays, I also have to do the Mrs. Doubtfires as well. But ultimately, the theater that I am the most interested and excited by, and the theater that moves me, generally does have some sort of a social justice or social impact, because I think that's our job. And I actually think that it is my belief in producing that the more you lead with your values in the art and in the show, the more the economic reward will be there as well. So the more authentic you are with what your message and your point and your perspective is, the economic success will follow. And I think where shows can get themselves lost in the weeds is when you start to compromise that vision, and where you're no longer necessarily thinking with that same goal, where you start to compromise, well, I need to do this in order to achieve this. Well, if that's not in service of the message, the goal, the art, the show, the commercial business that you're working to achieve, then you've compromised a value. And I think in the long run, in the grand scheme of things, your business will suffer in that way too.
That makes sense. Because what are you putting out there if you're changing it to just make it viable? You have to find a way to make them coexist, I would think.
Yeah, I mean, and one of the hardest things about this business, and the reality is Broadway is a terrible business from an economic perspective. When you look at the number of shows, the quote in the statistic that Broadway producers frequently state is that only 20% of our shows return their initial investment. And some people actually say that with a sense of pride, which I will never understand, because it's a terrible, what industry should lead with that sort of statistic? We should all be working to change that and make it a more successful enterprise in that way. But I think one of the challenges is when something you really love, like The Inheritance, and actually even Slave Play for that matter, because Slave Play did not fully recoup our investment on Broadway, is when you love something so much and it does not hit that level of commercial success that you believed it could and that you believed it should. And so that's, one of the elements that we're also constantly fighting with on Broadway is like with The Inheritance, when I saw the show initially in London, it was one of the most transformative experiences I will ever have in the theater. And the fact that when we moved it to Broadway, for a number of reasons, it never really found its audience, and it never really had that same sense of, it didn't provide that same experience to the majority of its audience, is disappointing. And it's our job as producers on the next one to think, why didn't it? And how do we change it and make sure that we are creating transformative experiences for our audiences?
That sounds like a tricky process to consider after a show that was so special to you and you believed in didn't go how you hoped it would. How do you kind of navigate that inquiry of where didn't this quite land?
Well, time heals all wounds. Jerry Herman said time heals everything. It does. And ultimately, you have to, everybody postmortems every show. And you look at, you have the more distance you have on that, the more objective you can be in your process and in your reasoning and your analysis of why something may or may not have succeeded. And sometimes the reality is so much of this business that we do is timing, things that are completely out of our control. Allegiance is an interesting example of this because Allegiance, we opened 5 months after Hamilton did on Broadway. When we were coming into Broadway, we thought that this idea of basically a fully Asian cast was going to be something that was really an exciting thing for Broadway to have. And then Hamilton came in and kind of took that press line away because they were a fully BIPOC cast. And then with Allegiance, we also started our previews like 2 months after Donald Trump had announced his candidacy for president. And in hindsight, I think Allegiance has just grown increasingly relevant because of the political climate. The idea of a group of people being judged and being oppressed by their government. And that's the reality is, I think that if Allegiance were to have opened in 2017 or 2018, I don't know that the total success would have changed, but I think the conversation around it, or that it would have been a different outcome. Maybe we would have run longer, or maybe we would have had a different outcome. Like Come From Away is also kind of a perfect example. Come From Away is an amazing musical. It's a show about on 9/11, how this tiny town in Newfoundland called Gander basically tripled its town population size overnight because all of the planes had to land there. And so how the locals took in all of these people off of these planes into their literal homes. It's a story of refuge. It's a story of refugees finding comfort and finding solace in this terrible time. But it opened again right after the election. And so I think we aim for the zeitgeist, and that's something also that we can only control so much. We can only control so much of that narrative.
Is it ever challenging to let go of that, or to refocus in that only so much of what you're putting forward is in your control? Or is that something you've pretty much dealt with by this point?
No, I mean, it's part of every show. We have regular ad and marketing and advertising meetings where we're talking about why this show and why right now. And that's something that we constantly, every show tries to move forward in their messaging. And, whether we are forward and we actually flatly articulate why this show, why right now, or you find other ways to try to push, suggest that in your messaging to your audience. That's definitely a part of it. Like Slave Play also is an interesting example. We closed on Broadway a year ago in January, 6 months before George Floyd's murder. And this show that deals with racial reckoning, how much more potent it would be in, how much, how would it play right now in the midst of this conversation that we're having as a society? It's different for sure. And so timing is everything. And so timing is out of our control. And so who knows, maybe Slave Play, when the pandemic is over, we'll find a life and, we'll find a unique way to continue to live on, which is certainly our hope as the producers of it. But you do have to, in addition to trying to figure out how to control that, there's only so much you can control.
Right. And it's funny that you should mention, would this have another life after the pandemic? Because I was wondering, do you ever pursue that? Are you ever like, yeah, the moment that this landed wasn't ideal, we should look at this again in the future? And have you remounted anything in that way, or?
Yeah, certainly. So Slave Play specifically, just because we're on it, Center Theater Group in Los Angeles has already announced that they are going to mount their own production of it at the end of the pandemic, which I think is currently scheduled for sometime in 2022 for them. But like with Allegiance, where we were not a commercial success, but with Allegiance, we knew that the show had a life, and that the majority of people who wanted to see the show, and this is true of all Broadway, the majority of people who want to see your show are prohibited from seeing it either geographically or financially. And so with Sing Out Louise, one of the things that we are also the most passionate about is expanding Broadway into these stage to screen live, we call them live captures. So in the same way that Hamilton was released in July of the Broadway show, we did that with Allegiance right after we closed the show on Broadway. And so even to this day, we continue to release it on DVD, or we'll announce, we have a few different announcements coming for the show in the next couple of months. But the reality is more people have seen the show post Broadway because of that than they did in our 6 months of running on Broadway. And so also, as somebody who is so truly passionate and just a genuine lover of all things Broadway, the way that I fell in love with Broadway was everything from Mary Martin's Peter Pan on VHS to Donny Osmond's Joseph on VHS to going to the library and getting cast albums. And, you know, like that was how I pursued my passion. And so I strongly believe, and my partners sing out that Louise strongly believe, that these live captures are the next extension of the Broadway cast recording, that this is where the industry has to go. And it's financially lucrative to a show to do it. And it's a way to get your show, your product, your brand, which are all nasty words in certain circles, in front of more people, which inherently just strengthens the value of your show to begin with. So like with Allegiance, we're also about to have our first Japanese production in Tokyo in Japanese next month because some producers in Japan saw the film. And so we strongly believe in, hopefully this pandemic has been a teaching moment for all Broadway producers, because this has been a soapbox that we have been on for years, but has proven that this is an important and valuable aspect of your show, is to figure out how to make a screen adaptation and a stage to screen live capture a part of it. And as we've seen in the pandemic, Hamilton obviously had tremendous success for Disney Plus. Come From Away just last week announced that they have a deal with E1, a big entertainment property, to do the same thing. Diana, which was a Broadway musical that had 2 previews before it totally shut down in the pandemic. Netflix went in and filmed in the middle of the pandemic. They filmed the show for release this year. And we don't even know when Broadway shows are going to reopen again. So people are going to see the film of Diana, the live capture of Diana, before they see the show in person. And the value of that is that you are more likely to go buy a ticket because you see a movie and you fall in love with it. If in the same way that I saw Mary Martin do Peter Pan, which made me want to go see Kathy Rigby in Peter Pan when she came on, when she went through the national tour in Cleveland, where I grew up. Like that, it all plays into the same value, and it's all just furthering the passion, but it's also a valuable proposition as a producer.
That it's so great to hear the multifaceted ways in which this is exciting to you. I mean, you know, of course, that it's economically viable is awesome, but this is really something that affects you. And I was excited to read in your career about this focus, because to me, it made me think about how I think the pandemic is making us refocus a little bit on accessibility. And you did mention that about, you know, location and the money that it costs to see a Broadway show, but it's really exciting to hear about professionals in the theater world finding ways to increase that accessibility, to get these stories that are so important to them in front of broader audiences.
Totally. I mean, that's like, yeah, it's exactly what I said, is that most people that want to see your show are not going to be able to see it if it's just on Broadway, because most people don't get to New York. Most people don't have $100 a ticket to spend to see it. But if you put it in front of them for $18 a ticket to see it in a movie theater, and they see it and they fall in love with it, they are more likely to say, I love that so much, I am gonna go and overcome these obstacles so that I can engage with that in a live way. And nobody expects the same experience when we're sitting in a movie theater as you do when you're sitting in a Broadway theater, or you're sitting in your national touring house. We all know, everybody knows, those are totally different experiences. When you see something live on stage created for that moment, and it's never going to happen that way ever again, versus this experience of sitting in a movie theater and seeing something that we've edited in a certain way because we wanted you to have that experience. And so it like, yes, it overcomes if you are not financially able to pay the ticket price to go and see it, you are able to enjoy it. And then maybe if you see the movie and you love it, you're going to go buy the cast album, you're going to go buy the recording. And so you can engage with it in all of these other ways. And it does increase this accessibility inherently, which is, you're right, is a total conversation that we as a society are having also along with this idea of racial reckoning. And it is just an extension of that.
Were you super pumped when other entities started doing the stage to screen capture that you had been doing for a while? Were you like, yes, I knew it?
Yes, it's definitely been affirming in the best of ways. I wish more of them would have called us before they agreed to with these other big check producers.
Hi, the pioneers are here.
But the other thing I will say, and this gets in the weeds a little bit, but with Bandstand and Allegiance, Bandstand was another Broadway musical that my office also did a screen transfer of. It's really important for you as the Broadway producer to maintain the control over your film so that you are the one that is responsible for getting in front of all of these other people. These content makers, when they are making all of this content that spans, Netflix is spending literally billions of dollars a year in producing new content. And they just want to get it out and they want to get it in front of as many eyes. They're not necessarily vested in have the same interest in you in making sure that your audience sees that show in the same way that you as the Broadway producer would. So it is a little bit different when we as the Broadway producers are doing that versus we're partnering with larger producers. And that's a super in the weeds element of it. But ultimately it's all for the best. We all need to be doing this. And these live captures are so important just in preserving the legacy of Broadway as well.
Yes, definitely. I mean, even as you've mentioned the Mary Martin Peter Pan a couple of times, like what a treasure that would have been lost had somebody not thought to record that way. I
may or may not still go back and watch that every once in a while because I love it so much. So I can only hope that that was 70 years, 60 years ago, that people 60 years from now will be doing the same thing with the films that we're helping to put out in the world.
I have a good feeling about that. I think that's a thing that you can count on. So we've talked a lot about the benefits of the stage to screen model that you've been working with. What are some of the challenges with that?
That's an interesting question. So some of the challenges are Broadway is an incredibly antiquated business. Like I said, we're on paper a terrible investment. Though if there are potential investors on this call, let's email on the side because I can tell you why it's not. But it is a terrible investment at face value. And one of the reasons why is because of our antiquated nature. We are slow to innovate. We are slow to evolve. The fact is, when you still buy the majority of Broadway shows sell tickets via telecharge, which is this, like everything from that experience of buying a ticket to when you get into the theater, we don't necessarily always have the most friendly front of house staff to welcome you. There are all of these elements to it. And so some of the challenges that we see when we're trying to convince people to do these captures are a very antiquated belief that it will cannibalize their Broadway audience, which the proof is that's, one person thought that years and years ago, said that, and people had subscribed to that as law. And the reality is the data, the examples, the case studies all prove the opposite. So that's one challenge, is that these live captures cannibalize your Broadway audience, which is wrong. The other challenge is that it risks a studio adaptation. So, if with Hadestown, if a big movie studio wanted to make a totally new film of Hadestown, an old-fashioned Broadway producer would say, us putting Hadestown up as the original Broadway production would threaten that deal. And the reality is all you have to do is look at Chicago and Phantom of the Opera to see how both of those Hollywood films, one which was fantastic and one which was not, but both of them really strengthened the brand of the Broadway show. And so 25 years later, 32 years later, those shows continue to run, and particularly during tourist weeks, are some of the highest grossing, most successful shows playing on Broadway. And that's because of how many people know those brands now and know those shows. Another challenge we have, and this is just kind of because it is new, is figuring out what the deal, how to make sure that everybody can share in the success of these films. And that everybody can also share a little bit in the risk of that. And so particularly that comes down to all of the contracting. With Broadway, we have every single person that works on a Broadway show is union and is a member of a union. And, we certainly all want to pay living wages and make sure that everybody is paying their bills and everything. But at the same time, we also need to make sure that we're not limiting ourselves and that we're really strengthening our business as a whole. And so figuring out those economic models that allow for that allow everybody to share in the reward when these films are very successful is part of that too. And so that just comes with, the more people do it, the more negotiations that happen and the more people see success. Now, I will say things like the Hamilton deal, and Hamilton is such an outlier in that, where everybody's looking to recreate this massive success that comes along once in a generation. And the reality is that will not happen again. And if it does, it will be on something that nobody expected it to. And so, there is a back and forth that has to happen and a feedback loop that has to happen. But that's all part of any industry that continues to innovate and continues to move into the future.
And you're laying a lot of the groundwork, it sounds like, for Broadway to do that. It's kind of mind-blowing for me to hear that you're talking about all of this empirical evidence of why this is a good idea, and you're still kind of having to present the same pieces of evidence. And that must...
It's expensive. The reality is what we do is an expensive venture. As a Broadway show with Allegiance, I'll speak because our office was the lead producer. We raised $13 million to get the show to Broadway, and we lost it all. All of that $13 million was lost by the actual Broadway production. And to do the film, we had to go back and we had to raise additional money to do the film. Now, because of the success of the film, we've been able to pay back some of the investment from the original Broadway film or from the original Broadway production. But what we do is an expensive enterprise for all of the reasons that we've just listed, making sure that everybody is being paid a living wage, as well as the cost of advertising and marketing. It's expensive to advertise and market your product in the most expensive city in the country when you're up against all of these massive retail brands. And our place of business, literally our place of business is in the middle of all of that advertising. Now, obviously, the reason all of that advertising is there is because our place of business is there. And we are the main economic driver of tourism in New York City. But that's all part of the financial equation that as a producer, we have to navigate.
How does navigating raising funds work when you're working with new work that you're not able to build on that familiarity with?
It's certainly more challenging, but it's also a lot more rewarding. Fortunately, I have an investment base, and the people that I work with regularly, the investors with whom we engage are all tremendously smart individuals, but they also recognize like I keep saying, Broadway it's an affinity investment. You invest in Broadway because you love the art, you love the experience of going to the theater, and you want to be a small part of making that happen. And so the people with whom we engage, are regularly engaged by that, and they're excited by that. But something like Slave Play, Jeremy O. Harris is clearly, a tremendous voice And even though this was his first Broadway play, it certainly won't be his last. And the people that helped bring that show to Broadway did so because of the importance of the work, the importance of the artists that were doing it, and that were bringing it to Broadway, as well as the potential for it hitting the zeitgeist in such a way that it would actually also be an economic, it would be a good investment, that they would make their money back as well as make a little bit on top of it and make a profit.
Cool. Oh my gosh. So as much as we talked about before that you're wearing these multiple hats, even in one answer, you're like, yep, the meaning of the show and why it's important, but then also we want to make money for our investors. And again, I'm sort of amazed by what a journey that must be every time to make sure that you're incorporating all of those concerns as you're coming to people with, hey, let's get this show to happen.
I mean, I guess it's the reason why I love what I do.
Yeah.
And again, I am such a genuine, at the most basic level, I am such a lover of Broadway. And I'm such an avid audience member. That's not to say that I love everything or most things that I see, because I will also say I'm frankly a bitter bitch with a lot of stuff. But I am such a lover of the experience, and we're all create. It's like an addict. You go through all of these bad trips for the one great trip. Like that's what we're after creating. It's like that one really amazing experience from when you engage with a piece of art that cannot be replicated in any other way. And so that makes it all worth it. And the way, again, it's my left brain, right brain. The way that we make such an experience is not just what's happening in the theater at that moment, but it's how the audience engages with that show. What's the first piece of advertising that they saw? What's the first article that they read about it? What made them get into the theater to see it? When they did, making sure that the box office and the front of house staff was nice to them so that they were in a good mood when they came in to see the show. Like all of those elements go into creating that sort of an experience so that when you leave the theater, you will always remember that experience that has created something so unique in you that you have to go tell somebody, I had this remarkable night. And that's ultimately how a show makes money, is that when you have created such an experience for somebody that they go tell their friend, you have to go engage and experience what I just did. Because if somebody just leaves the theater and says, it was fine, that doesn't make anybody want to go buy a ticket. But for with The Inheritance, for me to say I had one of the most transcendent experiences I will ever have from that day in the theater, and it's a 7-hour play. It's not just like it's a 7-hour play. That makes somebody intrigued and interested and excited to go and engage with that. Now, I also think that's probably one of the reasons why The Inheritance did not have the commercial success, because it was a 7-hour play. But anywho, still, like that's what we're going after. And so creating that and being aware of all of the little things that create that experience is how you interact with that and what you're creating.
I'm hearing that you're having to think of every detail from the time that the show enters someone's mind to when they're leaving the theater having seen it. And that's a lot of moving pieces, as you talked earlier with your wheel metaphor. Because you're not just building a show, you're building an experience.
Yeah, that's the thing, is that theater is, I think if you look at what you've been hearing about, at least in the pandemic, we're live entertainment. We're in the same experience you have when you go see a concert at Madison Square Garden, or you see Elton John, or like they're great performers. Those are experiences where you are willing to pay the exorbitant amount of money to go and experience that night, because you know that you will feel fulfilled in such a way to do that. And so all of this goes into creating that. And at the end of the day, also, we're competing for that ticket buyer. We're competing for that dollar in the same way.
Yeah. It was also very interesting for me to hear the emphasis that you put on and audience members taking in of the whole experience and sharing it. So it sounds to me like word of mouth is still a major vehicle for the success of a show, even at this Broadway level. I mean, we hear that a lot in these smaller theaters, you know, word of mouth gets butts and seats and things like that. But I'm hearing from you that this is true at the highest level of theater also.
You cannot pay for that. That's an advertising that you can't put a dollar amount on me going to you and saying, no, you don't understand. You have to see this show before it closes. No, you don't understand. You have to go see this. And like, using Slave Play as an example, one of the reasons why we wanted to get involved with it for Broadway was because we would hear, literally, I would be out at dinner and hear another table talking about the show from they saw it off Broadway. And one of the things that I loved about it when I saw it off Broadway is that nobody left that show feeling ambivalent or feeling, everybody left that theater, that 200-seat theater, either loving the experience that they just had or absolutely hating it. And frankly, the saying is, you know, all press is good press, bad press is good press too. That's all goes into this too. And so like, a word of mouth is something that you can't compete with when somebody says, no, you have to experience this for yourself, and your life will not be fulfilled. Or like we talk about cachet, like with the New York audience. Obviously, they're New Yorkers. There's like an intelligentsia audience member that we have to go after as well. Like, we want to make our show the intelligentsia event of the season that people are going to talk about, that people are going to read about in the New York Times, that people are going to read about in like these are cultural moments, not just experiences.
Ooh, cultural moments. You're building cultural moments also. So does this ever figure into when you go to the theater, you see something, you're like, that was amazing. Is that how The Inheritance happened to be part of one of the pieces that you worked on, that you had seen it and had this experience and you're like, we have to get this to New York?
Certainly. Honestly, you know, like I said, it's a bad business. It's a bad business. So if we do something and I'm not engaged, or one of us is not totally into it, it's not worth it, because the reality is we're most likely going to lose some money, maybe not all of their money, but somebody's going to lose some money. And we have to be the ones that relay that message to them. And that's not a responsibility that any of us take lightly. And so unless we are very engaged or we really believe in the project in whatever way it is, there's no point in us being involved.
That's a really beautiful thing to hear, especially in regards to, you know, when we're talking about the business side of producing, it's easy to lose sight of that. It's works that are really important to you. And that's why you're spending so much effort and time and money and things like that.
We won't get into the weeds of it, but producers don't make money until the investors have gotten their money back. And so from a perspective of just like making a living in this business, it's a terrible enterprise. It's a terrible idea to essentially say, I'm going to go do this thing that is more than likely to fail. I'm going to not only get paid to do it, but I'm going to spend my money and other people's money to do it. There has to be a level of passion and belief in the ultimate success, and success is not just commercial. Success has a big definition, but there has to be a level of that belief in success in order for us to do this, be in this job. In the same way that actors have to believe that there is no other thing that they could do other than act. In the same way that chorus line deals with the only thing that these people can do, these characters on stage can do, is to dance in a Broadway show. The same thing goes for the people that are making Broadway happen from the business end of it.
That's a great unifying thing for us all to remember as we're thinking about these shows, I think. And that makes me think of, I noticed on the Daily Monda website that you do a lot of one-person shows. How has that come to be? Well,
I would expand it a little bit. A lot of the things that that Frankie and I work with, are artists who are self-producing. So there are artists who have created the work or are directing a play that they really believe in. and maybe they have found some financing. An aunt has left them a big check, or they have an angel benefactor that says, yes, I definitely want to help you and support you in this way. They come to us, and one of the things that we're really passionate and good at is creating these business models for artists that are self-producing. And so how do we talk to an artist who doesn't necessarily have the experience with budgets and advertising and all of these economics and logistic conversations that we're having? How do we translate those to them so that they can, as the producer, make informed decisions? But also, how can we make sure that the economic picture that we're painting and that the framework that we're going to work within is also servicing the work that that artist has created? And so that's a unique, I think that's a unique spin that we bring to the business. And so the reason why we do a lot of one person, and particularly one of the series we do is a producer who commissions people to do one act, one person musicals. But that's because that it's in that way. It's that we're very good at and passionate for helping artists figure out how to also be producers. Because also nobody is going to be as passionate about your work as you are. You are going to be the best salesperson for selling your show, whether it's to investors or to ticket buyers. And so how do we empower those artists to also be their biggest advocate?
That's an incredible endeavor. I mean, what an invaluable experience you're providing for these artists. Not only saying, hey, I know you have this work that you're really excited about, but let me help you figure out how to get it out there. And that's so cool that you're not only making the works happen, but you're giving them the tools to do that in the future. I mean, what an incredible gift.
And it's a lot of fun.
Yes, that's what we want to hear. Also, it's
most of the time. That's not to say that there's no frustration attached to it, but most of the time it's a lot of fun.
I believe that. Cool. Well, so let's transition now. You've given us a lot of information. I really dug into some of these details about what it is to be a producer and a manager and on Broadway and in the world. I want to ask you some more, light, quick, rapid fire questions. You ready?
Let me take a sip of coffee.
There you go. Yes, prepare. I will also take a sip of water.
Oh, you're better at hydrating than I am. Well, go for it. Let's do it, Jessica.
Let's do it. You kind of touched on this earlier, but do you think there's a particular show that our country needs right
now? Just because I'm currently so obsessed with it, there is a musical that will hopefully be Broadway bound after the pandemic called A Strange Loop that won the Pulitzer last year. And it is, I have not experienced a musical like that in a long time, and it makes me very excited for the direction of our business and the direction of our art.
Ooh, that's a great teaser about that. I'm going to be looking that up later.
You can get the cast album.
Ooh, thanks. That's a good tip. Get the cast album for Strange Loop. You heard it here first. What is your favorite show?
Oh, I don't have a single one. I have 5 favorite musicals. I'll quickly rattle them off because this is such a popular question of mine. Ragtime, Sunday in the Park with George, Sweeney Todd, Gypsy, and Funny Girl.
It's a solid list. One is, I have a lot of questions that we kind of already answered. I'm going to go James Lipton on you. What's your favorite sound?
My favorite sound?
It's a tough one.
The sound of coffee brewing in the morning.
Ooh, yes, and instantly I could smell it. So that's,
yeah,
I get it. What is your favorite word?
Not appropriate for this conversation, but it's definitely the F word.
It has so many usages.
Correct. It's pretty universal in its usage.
I understand why this is your favorite, and I'm glad you shared it all the same. What is your favorite takeout meal?
The Italian restaurant in my neighborhood does chicken marsala, and it's pretty freaking delicious.
Yes, and in your neighborhood is very winning.
It's seamless in New York. I assume it's other places too, but delivery and everything. I love it.
Perfect. Are there any quarantine habits you've picked up?
Ooh, that's an interesting one. A daily walk. I was previously used to walking so much just being in New York, and I have had to make time in my schedule to go on a daily walk each day.
Does that become like a Zen practice or like?
Yeah, and it becomes my time with me to also problem solve. So if I'm dealing with a particularly difficult quandary or something, it's my good time to just tune in with myself and figure out a way out.
Something about moving that makes that a little bit easier, isn't there?
1,000%. Well, it's connecting your brain to your body.
Yes, that mind-body connection.
Correct.
Well, I am seeing that we have some questions from our audience in the chat. Shall we transition over to those?
Let's do it.
Let's do it. Let me scroll up to get the first one. Our first question comes from Mary Copenhagen, who asked, how do you deal with a build estimate being over budget? And how do you approach this with the designer and the director?
Oh, well, Mary Copenhagen, I can tell you've got experience in this field. Well, the GM and me will never give the designer the full actual budget. Though I will say I'm having interesting conversations right now about transparency in general, and there seems to be a movement in the other direction for being very transparent with your designer, which makes sense. And so, I mean, that's part of the collaboration, and that's a part of the natural experience. I don't think I've ever been a part of the show where the bid has come in under budget. So that's part, you figure it out. And honestly, what's the cliche that the pandemic has brought on, that oh God, necessity is the mother of innovation, or something like that. So like that's part of the process and part of the collaboration that hopefully, as you have to figure out how to get your build in for budget, it's helping you by focusing in the design and focusing in on what's most important to you. And as I was saying, particularly with self-producing clients, one of the things we ask at the very beginning of the process are, what are your 3 goals for doing this? Like, what are your 3 objectives, whether it's to sell tickets, get an agent, whatever it is. I would say asking, being aware and asking yourself that question. And as you're going line item by line item through the bid, is this in service of that? And if not, then you have information on how to make a decision.
Awesome. That was a great question. Thank you, Mary. Thanks for answering it, Joey. Our next question comes from Leonard Standridge, who asks if you can discuss the possibility of a film adaptation of Hadestown. Will the show reopen again in New York post-pandemic? You have some folks who are excited to see it again.
I am one of those folks that is excited to see it again. I can confidently say that it will open again. When is like with the rest of Broadway is up in the air, because none of us know when any of our shows are going to reopen, but it will definitely open again. And as far as an actual film adaptation of it, with every Broadway show, a studio adaptation is always a part of the conversation. I don't know how far down our lead producers have gotten with that conversation, but obviously there's a desire from the people that have worked on it and think that it would translate well. And I also think there would be a great live capture of it as well, that we hopefully can say will be in the works in the next couple of months. We hope.
Yes, that would be so wonderful. That soundtrack is incredible.
It's pretty spectacular.
It really is. It really is. Our next question comes from Scott Myers, who is asking, do you think investors will be enthusiastic to engage when we return to live theater, or will they be hesitant with the uncertainty that we're living through now?
That's a good question. And I think it's one I don't really know. I could make arguments on both sides of the equation, and we'll see. I think I will only speak for my network. I do think that my network will be very enthusiastic about Broadway coming back, particularly in investing their money in theater. I also think as Broadway producers get smarter, and as we realize, like what we've seen now with Hamilton, The Prom is a great example that it did a Netflix film. They're going to go back on a national tour. I think Broadway producers are realizing that we're not just Broadway producers, and we are actually media producers. And so when we start a Broadway show, we're effectively starting a small media company. And so I think investors will be excited and encouraged by all of the different ways that producers start to look at how to expand their properties other than just the actual Broadway show. If it's a podcast, if it's a TV show, Dear Evan Hansen put out a young adult novel of their show. The Prom did the same. Like, there's all of these different ways that Broadway shows themselves can make money. And I think as that becomes more regular, investors will be more enthusiastic to support Broadway shows.
That makes sense, because you're proving, even in this moment of uncertainty, oh, we're still going to make money doing this, working on this piece. I
think anything about the landscape that was pre-pandemic is everything is up for grabs. You know, the reality is now that every theater company that's been trying to do digital programming, none of them are going to go back to just producing an in-person season. They should, at least every theater company should be considering doing their in-person season and their digital programming now. They effectively have to program 2 different seasons because this digital season is how they engage a new audience, people that have never set foot in their theater, that people are, all of the reasons we just went through with the live capture. And so I think all of that in general will not just make investors, but will also make arts donors who fund the regional network also more enthusiastic and excited, because art is going to be reaching out in new ways, and people are going to be engaging with art in new and exciting ways than before.
As you said before, this is a zeitgeist. Things are changing.
Yep.
That's wonderful. Our next question comes from Joseph, who asks, is the fact that you have a good track record does that make it a little easier to raise money, or is every show a start from zero situation?
Well, success has multiple definitions, because if you look at the number of shows that I've worked on, the majority of them have not recouped their investment. So that, but also, you know, having the most valuable thing that I can bring to the table is what we've discussed, is taste. And so making sure that when I have a conversation with any potential investor, it's something that I fully believe in. It's something that I believe needs to be seen and is and I believe in the people that are bringing it to Broadway or are making it happen. And so my track record of taste, I think, makes it a good conversation, and certainly, you know, helps further that conversation along. But effectively, you know, I am starting from zero. When I sign on for a show, I might have like, oh, I know this person's taste and they would respond well to this potential project, but effectively nothing is guaranteed. I am starting from zero, and that's always a part of the conversation.
You have your network, and you have that you're unique with this taste that you've proven a certain track record with, but yeah. And my network,
I mean, my network, this is for anybody interested in producing. My network does not necessarily, like I keep saying, they're not investing in the business propositions that I'm necessarily putting in front of them. They're investing in me. They're investing in the fact that I might, this one might not work out, but at some point I'm going to bring them something that will. But they align with my taste. They trust that I'm not going to put a bad opportunity, for whatever that word bad, that subjective is, however subjective that is. They trust me, and they're investing in me, not necessarily just the property or just the show or the proposition that I'm putting in front of them.
Yeah. Oh, that's so neat. That really, again, continues to illuminate the way that your choices as a producer are about what speaks to you and about what you think are going to speak to audiences.
It's all about you. If you're not passionate about it, it's not worth doing it. I can say there are a number of shows that have reached economic success and commercial success that we passed on because we were not passionate about the show itself. And you know, I always joke, I'm a big fan of The Nanny, Fran Drescher's The Nanny. The ongoing joke was that Mr. Sheffield passed on Cats. And so I do have certain projects that I won't say that, did go on, not to the level of cat success, but, but I don't regret that at all, because the show wasn't right for me to be involved in.
Sure, that makes sense. You have to be passionate about it. I mean, the team has to be passionate about it, probably in part to make it work.
Totally.
Joseph also asks if there's a way that folks can contact you directly. Is there a place on your website we should direct them, or?
There is. You can contact me through the website, but I will also give you my personal email address, which is very complicated. It's my name, joey@joeymonda.com.
I'll just pop that in the chat in case anybody missed it, but I bet everybody got it because it's pretty straightforward. Cool. And then we have one more question at the moment that comes from Tatiana, who asks, how much has the pandemic affected the live performance process, and how much has it influenced the way we will make theater in the future? I do feel like you've touched on that a little bit, but if you want to give us your cliff notes on that.
Yeah, I can say, it's a constantly evolving conversation. The reality is we still have no idea how Broadway is going to come back. We don't know if we're going to if every audience member is going to have to be tested with, rapid tests. The landscape is still so unknown. I do think realistically, there are certain parts of this process that are with us for the long haul. We're going to all be wearing masks for the foreseeable future. But as far as like the actual specific process of it, I think the thing that's made it so challenging to theater, which also, just as a total side tangent, this moment that we're having in live theater, specifically in live entertainment, is so truthfully terrifying because of how difficult it is for the people who make their living in this field. People went from having day jobs where they woke up every day to having nothing, and having to completely try secondary sources of income. And so, I keep saying, fortunately, with Slave Play and The Inheritance, both of them were nominated for Tony Awards. So effectively, I'm a 2-time Tony Award nominee right now. But at the same day that the Tony nominations were announced, I was also putting my office furniture into storage because I didn't know when we would be back in offices. And so all of that is to say, whatever you can be doing to support your network of artists of live performance and live entertainment, I highly encourage people to do so. It's incredibly important. Make a donation to your theater. Buy a ticket as soon as it's possible to see it. Download with their streaming content. Do it. It's all important. But like I said, so I think macroly, there's going to be huge things for digital distribution is now a huge part of the landscape, and that's never going to go away again. I do think that we're going to see streamers, and we're going to see Netflix and Amazon and Hulu and Disney all starting to play in this field in a different way. But as far as affecting the live performance process, the actual what happens in the space, I still don't know. We don't know how many are we going to have to hire COVID safety monitors that are in every rehearsal room and make sure that are people going to have to stage things traditionally so that we're not so close to each other? Broadway theaters, these theaters were all built 100 years ago, some even longer. Like, they're cramped quarters. We can't, before we can even ensure the safety and health of our audience, we can't do the health and safety of our staff and production crew and actors. So I don't think we know yet how it's all gonna play out. The effectiveness of the vaccine is obviously going to be huge. But all of that being said, all of the things that put theater at the most risk right now and like make it the most challenging and the reason why we can't do it are also all of the reasons why we all love it, why I love it. I love being in having this experience with 1,000 people at the same time that will never happen again. I love creating an experience where the things that happen outside of the audience's view are choreographed to the point where when you see backstage of what happens at a Broadway musical, it is choreography with the crew knowing where every actor is and everything. I love being a part of that and creating that experience. So for all of those experiences that make it impossible to do right now, those are the things that I love the most. And so at the end of the day, I also don't think those will change. Theater has been around for thousands of years. We know that. That's a stupid macro. Greeks and Romans did it. It's going to come back. But who knows if, actors are going to be wearing masks during rehearsal and then they won't for performances, in the same way that film and TV sets are trying to figure out how this works. We just don't know yet.
Surely this can't be the first pandemic theater has had to survive.
It's not, but it's definitely the one where it has been the most complicated.
Sure. This modern world.
So, but we will come back and it's going to take us a minute to become just as strong as we were, but we will be.
Yes, definitely. I love that optimism and I fully believe in it. I don't want to call it optimism, make it sound like, yeah.
No, we started the conversation with saying I'm feeling optimistic, so we can call it optimism.
Yes, but also it's going to happen.
Sure. Pragmatism in reality.
Yes. It looks like we have one more question. Joseph asks, can a new musical ever become a success if it never opens on Broadway?
Oh, Joseph, that's a great question. I really hope so. And I can promise you that there is a whole generation of producers that are having that conversation with themselves, that want to figure out how to make it happen. I guess, again, the question I have is, when you say success, what do you mean by success? Does success to you equal it being produced at every high school and regional theater in the country? Is success to you, like, what does success mean? It's a subjective word. And so figuring out exactly what you mean by, can a new musical be successful? The reality is we don't have, off-Broadway isn't what it once was, where shows like Nonsense or I Love You, You're Perfect Now Change that ran for, years and years and years, were successful without ever getting a Tony nomination. The industry doesn't really do that anymore. But I hope that it does. And I know that there are a lot of people, myself included, that have a vested interest and are constantly asking themselves how to shift that dynamic and make that possible again.
I was not anticipating that answer. That was a very exciting one. Sometimes you can't see where these are going to go. But
try to keep you on your toes.
You sure are. Well, so that looks like all the questions we have from the audience. Is there anything else you would like to share with us before we say our thanks? And
just to reiterate that as soon as your local theater, or as soon as anybody can, buy a ticket, go see a show when it's safe, and when you know that you can do it by maintaining your health. It's going to be important for everybody to do their duty by getting back into the theater. And if we as the community start to do that, hopefully that will permeate out, and more people will do that. But it's going to be super important for all of us to get back into a theater as soon as it is safe to do so.
Amen. Thank you for that send off. And thank you so much for chatting with us today. It has been a pleasure talking with you and learning about what it is you do and the work that you're excited about.
Well, thank you, Jessica. I really appreciate it. I will also say, I know a lot of the people on this call might be students. The world is going to get better. The business is going to get better. Don't be afraid of what you're going to face when you're no longer at your university. It does come back. It just is going to look different.
Hear, hear. Well, thanks again, everyone. Thank you so much for being here with us. And thanks.
Have a great night, everybody. Thanks for having me. We'll talk soon. Bye-bye.